One of the pleasures I've had over the years as the chair of the Peace Center is that we have brought David Barsamian to Lane Community College multiple times. And over the years, I've had the pleasure to get to know David, who is the founder of Alternative Radio, which is now in its 30th year. 31st year of operation. And yeah. We've been lucky to have some of the programs we've produced included in the list of things you can find on Alternative Radio. So thank you for that, David.
You're welcome.
So what do we say about David other than the 30 years? Well, he's partnered with many people, and books that you see here in front of you include partnerships with Howard Zinn, Noam Chomsky, Tariq Ali, Richard Wolff, Rudy Roy, and Edward Said, all giants in terms of progressive outlooks and politics in this world. He's been recognized as the winner of the Media Education Award, the ACLU's Upton Sinclair Award for Independent Journalism, the Cultural Freedom and Fellowship from the Lanana Foundation. The Institute for Alternative Journalism called him one of America's top 10 media heroes. And I think, given the events of the last week, to have David here to talk about resistance in the age of Trump ought to be very entertaining. David Barsamian.
Thank you, Stan, for that introduction, and it's always a pleasure to be back at the Peace Center at one of the most important community colleges in the United States, Lane, a real treasure that you have here in Eugene. Well, good afternoon, students, brothers, sisters, comrades. It's good to see you all here on this glorious Thursday. I've been traveling quite a bit, so I always have to look at the day and the date. I was in Jordan a couple of weeks ago, came back to the U.S., was detained at Denver International Airport for the fourth consecutive time because I had been to Iran in late September. And since that visit to Iran, I've been questioned and taken aside and basically harassed, trying to intimidate me from doing my job as a journalist, which is to go to those places that the corporate media won't go to or refuse to go to, or if they do, distort what they report on. And there are a few areas in the world which is more saturated with propaganda than the Middle East. And of course, our illustrious, exalted president is about to go to Israel and Saudi Arabia, two steadfast allies of Washington. Saudi Arabia, as you know, is this wonderful bastion of human rights, women's liberation, just setting the standard for international norms. It's a kleptocracy. It's a feudalistic government, and you won't believe this, but in a secret vote was just voted onto a UN commission on the rights of women. I'm sure this will come up when the exalted leader visits Riyadh and talks about freedom and democracy and women's liberation. And speaking of the military-industrial complex, the permanent war machine, as I look out on this audience, there are some of you who have known nothing but war since 2001. You have been nurtured in that landscape and that soundscape in the background of U.S. military intervention and U.S. military operations, now extending to West and Central and East Africa, of course, throughout the Middle East and into South Asia, into Pakistan. It's a global empire, and the way to change the military war machine is to change U.S. foreign policy, which requires billions of dollars to be spent on armaments in order to defend the interests of that foreign policy. Those are not the interests of the American people. It is the interests of the Fortune 500 and the Forbes 400. It's the interests of the military contractors who make hand-over-fist profits. Right now, in Saudi, when Trump goes to Saudi Arabia, he's going to probably sign a $100 billion deal for arms to that great bastion of human rights. So the cycle continues. The media don't report the real information about what's going on and what prompts all of this hostility and antagonism toward the United States around the world. They can barely get, there are 5 W's in journalism. Are there any journalism students here? Who, what, where, and when. They can barely get those straight, without saying Iran and Iraq and Tehran. And, when I'm interrogated at airports coming back into the United States, it's pathetic, the level of lack of any kind of linguistic awareness, so they would ask me, what were you doing in Iran? And did you meet any Iranians? And did you go to Tehran and Shiraz and places like that? Just taking a little bit of care for the culture of others speaks a lot. But when you're the master of the universe, it doesn't matter. Those calculations do not come into play. And that's the kind of cultural imperialism that Edward Said talked about so eloquently for so many years. So we have to change the policies which engender more and more jihad. Has anyone wondered why since September 11th there has been a proliferation of al-Qaeda franchises, almost like McDonald's or Burger King or Wendy's, all over the world, taking on new names, taking on new tactics and, kind of new hairstyles and the like. It's directly related to the foreign policy of the United States, which can only be described. We have to speak in plain language. If you learn anything from Orwell and Chomsky at all, is to use simple, concrete language. And the word here that applies is imperialism, a system that is designed to extract profits from other countries through their resources and to extend hegemony and domination over those countries, all in the name of the national interest. You'll notice the last speech I think that Obama gave was replete with the mention of the term national interest. So it was in the national interest, to launch drone strikes in Yemen. It was in the national interest to deploy special operations forces in Mali or the Ivory Coast or Niger. It's in the national interest to bomb Pakistan and Iraq and Afghanistan and occupy parts of Syria. What is that national interest, pray tell? It's never defined because it would be too revealing. And so we're all cloaked in this nationalism. We're all part of this. It's in our interest. You benefit every time there's a drone strike on a mosque in Pakistan or a wedding party in Afghanistan. You benefit because it's in the national interest. Funny how the people on the receiving end of the bombs don't feel that way. Gosh, they're just not up with the program. Now, what's that about? So I think, to talk about imperialism is an absolute must, and you'll never find that word used anywhere in the corporate media. And you have to look with some effort, even in the alternative media, to find the term imperialism connected with U.S. foreign policy in the same sentence. So they may be talking about, British imperialism and French imperialism and Soviet and Russian imperialism and the Dutch and, past historical examples, but never in the present, because we are above it all. This is the exceptional nation, as we're reminded over and over again. We are indispensable to the peoples of the world, indispensable to global peace, as Madeleine Albright once said. We are and has been repeated over and over again through Obama, through Trump. Indispensable nation. We have the burden of liberating peoples way beyond our borders and then occupying them. And meanwhile, if they happen to have some natural resources that we can pick up along the way, well, that's just an extra little bonus. So the oil reserves of Saudi Arabia, the greatest strategic prize in the history of the world, is firmly under U.S. control. In fact, it was FDR in February of 1945 on a cruiser in the Suez Canal called the Quincy, where this Faustian bargain was struck. Mind you, this is 3 years before the founding of the State of Israel. You know, people heap up, a lot of the tensions in the Middle East on Israel, but it goes back to that deal that Roosevelt made with Ibn Saud, which guaranteed U.S.-only access to Saudi oil wells in return for U.S. guarantees to protect the Saudi monarchy. That was the deal, and it is still in place, and you'll see it play out in the coming days as well. Often I mention Dwight the Eisenhower, who, if he were alive today, probably would have no place in the Republican or Democratic Party, be regarded as a kind of weird pacifist or an outlier of some sort. But it was he in January of 1961, as John F. Kennedy and the best and the brightest were about to assume power in Washington, who warned the country about the military-industrial complex. This is coming from a career militarist, right? A five-star general, commander of all troops at D-Day, commander of the European Theater of Operations. And he's warning the country about the dangers of a military-industrial complex. Well, what has happened in the 50-plus years since that warning was given? The military-industrial complex now consumes the American economy. It is dominant in terms of factoring in GNP and the like, and that has, of course, created enormous distortions in the economy. Instead of building aircraft carriers, we should be building solar panels, right? And not only is the amount of money spent criminal and indefensible, I mean, it's outrageous in sheer monetary terms. There's a whole group of Ford aircraft carriers that are now being launched. One was just launched. It came in at a cool $13 billion a pop. That does not include the servicemen and women on the aircraft carrier. It does not include the jet planes. It does not include the pilots and the helicopters and all the other war paraphernalia. We now have, I know I just met someone from Maine, a new class of destroyers named after a Vietnam-era war criminal, Zumwalt, costing $4 billion a pop. These are stealth destroyers. So presumably when Bangladesh or Botswana or some other global naval power, attacks the Oregon coast, we will be able to protect ourselves from these onslaughts, which of course, we are totally surrounded by enemies who wish us nothing but harm. So we need more military hardware, more F-35s, more F-21s, and on and on and on. Meanwhile, our students and their parents and grandparents are staggering under a $1.4 trillion debt. The average student debt, and I just met a couple of students at OSU in Corvallis, $45,000, $50,000. Hey, that's like under the average. And that's what's going on. I wish I could give you some breaking news here. I wish it were true, that the Ducks coach, football coach, who makes many millions of dollars, has decided to give his salary to pay off student debt. Now, wouldn't that be an awesome thing to do? How much does he make here? The OSU coach makes $2.5 million a year. I'm kind of worried. How do they make ends meet, these football coaches on your campus and in Corvallis? It must be tough. Maybe we can have a garage sale afterwards, and I could donate some of the books and CDs to helping out the athletics department, which is, of course, one of the major fundraising things. Well, I want to stick to the topic, but being a Gemini, I find that somewhat hard to do. It's easy to go off in different directions. But one of the things I learned from Howard Zinn, a great radical historian who changed the way we think about American history, and he has spawned a whole plethora of new radical writers who see American history and world history through a totally different lens, not the one that is produced by corporate media and corporate academia. And one of the things I learned from Howard was to use humor whenever possible, just to lighten the load, because the material is so heavy. You've got to provide some other kind of nourishment. So stay with me as I introduce you to dun 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 dun, this breaking news story. We interrupt this program from the from Lane Community College to bring you this breaking news story from TIBC, the Truth in Broadcasting Corporation, from our world corporate headquarters in our secure state-of-the-artless underground studios in Roswell, New Mexico. I'm Dick Veneer, your glib and banal anchor of Facade News, the 24/7 newscast dedicated to keeping you in the dark. We go straight to the surface of a story, and we stay there. We're dedicated to the highest standards of journalism. No one can challenge our in-shallow reporting. We make things up as we go along, unencumbered by elitist concepts of truth and facts and science. Our award-losing reporters are dedicated to giving you fake news all the time, with a thorough and scrupulous disregard for documentation. Our credos, unfair and unbalanced. We deceive, you believe. Ladies and gentlemen, an amazing story coming across our news desk at this very moment. President Trump, our exalted leader, has determined that 2 and 2 is 5. He told Facade News in an exclusive interview just moments ago that after much soul-searching and consultations with his daughter and son-in-law, that he now concludes that long-held views that 2 and 2 is 4 are wrong. He described the discovery while playing golf as amazing, unbelievable. Stay tuned for updates on this and other breaking stories right here on Facade News. I'm Dick Veneer, your still glib and banal anchor of Facade News, reminding you, believe our news or else. And now back to Lane Community College. Oh, it's great to laugh. You can see I have some stand-up comedian Borscht Belt influence in me. And speaking of that, I see there are a couple of people in the audience over 30, so I don't have to remind them that there used to be a course taught in English classes. Remember composition? There was also penmanship. It's a very esoteric art, it's now lost. The reason I say that is I'm going to hand out an alternative radio sign-up sheet. If you did not get a notice from my office in Boulder, then you're not on my sign-up sheet. Please write clearly. Just your email, that's all we need. If you don't have it, street address would be great. I won't share this with the NSA because they already have all your material. You don't have to worry. That's how far we've come in the world's second largest democracy. India, of course, being the world's largest democracy, a country from which I have now been banned for 6 years. So it's not all practitioners of yoga there and sitar players and vegetarians and people chanting Hari Om mantras and living in ashrams. It's a very violent country. There's particular violence going on in the state of Kashmir, where the Muslim majority population has been asserting its rights for sovereignty and liberation and it's been brutally crushed by the Indian regime, which we support, by the way. There's hardly a dictatorship in the world that does not have support, particularly from this administration, particularly from Donald Trump, be it Erdogan of Turkey, who was in Washington just yesterday, receiving praise from Trump as a great Democrat. I don't know if you've been following the news in Turkey, but even by Trump standards, to call Erdogan a great Democrat is a real stretch of the imagination. Erdogan is someone who, after a failed coup in July, has jailed over 100,000 people, sacked tens of thousands of lawyers, state prosecutors, judges, policemen. The media are being muzzled. They are muzzled. They're heavily censored. And the U.S. just stands by and says, Turkey is a great ally. This repeats itself, by the way, over and over again. There's Sisi in Egypt, same kind of treatment. He's a military dictator. He was the first person that called Trump, and Trump happily received his, when Trump was selected on November 8th. We see that what I'm saying now is we have to place Trump in the context of what's going on globally. So you have this right-wing, xenophobic, anti-Muslim regime in New Delhi under Narendra Modi, who was chief minister of a state when thousands of Muslims were massacred, and he claims that he knew nothing about it. Yet we know, as journalists, that the Hindu nationalist mobs were going from house to house and from store to store, identifying which ones were Muslim and killing those people and burning down their homes and their businesses. Now, he claimed as chief minister he didn't know what was going on. Well, then he's enormously incompetent if he didn't know that thousands of his fellow citizens were being killed and brutalized. And it goes on. And most recently, he is appointed as the chief minister of the most populous state in India, Uttar Pradesh, which is literally the size of the United States in terms of population, something like 300 million. He's appointed someone who is being criminally charged for racist behavior toward Muslims, an extreme fundamentalist. His name is Yogi Adityanath. Again, this all passes under the media radar because India is an ally of the United States. There was a little bit of a glimmer of light from La France and En Marche a couple of Sundays ago when Macron was elected as the new president of France. But mind you, in defeating the xenophobic, racist Marine Le Pen, she still got 35% of the vote. I mean, that's pretty shocking when you consider, the home of liberal democracy, the home of Rousseau and, other great philosophers about the meaning of democracy. What we're finding globally is this worldwide trend toward xenophobia, toward intolerance and racism and scapegoating. And these demagogues are very skillful, including the one that's sitting in the Oval Office today, at labeling other people for the problems that this group may be facing. So you're out of a job or you're not being paid what you think you should be paid. Hey, it's because of that Mexican immigrant. It's because of those Arabs. It's because of those Muslims. They're taking your jobs. You're suffering because of them. Classic scapegoating used by demagogues since the hills, since the early days of humanity. So what we're seeing is what Gramsci talked about. Antonio Gramsci, the great Marxist thinker and philosopher who died in 1937. We are seeing more and more of what he called morbid symptoms. How does someone like Trump, uniquely unqualified, it's not me saying that, it's people, conservatives, arch conservatives like David Brooks writing in the New York Times, like George Will and many others, uniquely unqualified. How does he get 60 million people to vote for him? I mean, that's a serious question. That's not just a rhetorical question. When I was traveling around the country last spring, giving talks, and I was actually in Canada on this occasion in Ottawa. And I was telling the audience there that no matter what happens, I didn't think Trump was going to win then. I didn't even know if he was going to win the nomination. I said, no matter what, he's going to get 50 or 60 million people to vote for him. I mean, that's a very sobering number, that so many people can be hoodwinked and seduced by a charlatan, basically, someone who's a master at a con game. And we find what's going on in Poland, in Hungary with Viktor Orban, and in Austria with Jorge Halder, in the Netherlands with Geert Wilders. These people were, Wilders and in the Netherlands and Halder in Austria were recently defeated. But it's interesting also to see that right-wing neo-fascists are coming to power through the ballot box, much as Hitler did in 1932. He didn't seize power. He won, he won through an election. And so that tells you a lot about the whole weakness of the democratic system and our still, almost mystical belief in the sanctity of elections. So we have to, and why is this happening globally? And it is a global phenomenon. It's happening because of the utter failure and collapse of neoliberalism, which has worked just great for the 1%. It has delivered unparalleled wealth to those who own the country. Not you, not your parents, not your friends, not your grandparents, but the owners of the country. They have benefited enormously from this new economic order, cutting taxes, enabling all kinds of deregulation, which allowed, as was said in this actually a very good Hollywood movie about Wall Street, if they had a pulse, we would sell it to them. It was, and that would be these fake mortgages. And knowingly, they were doing this, and yet what does Obama, the liberal, progressive, articulate, eloquent president do? Bails out the banks. Not a single banker has gone to jail. There's been some hedge fund traders and day traders that have gone to jail, but the big boys have remained safe. And that, I think, really annoyed a lot of people, particularly people who lost their wealth, they lost their savings, they lost their homes, they lost their jobs. That neoliberalism, which has been promoted aggressively by the IMF through the loans that they make, through the World Bank, through the loans that they make, and the general economic order of the world, has deeply wounded lots and lots of people. And this has grave implications for democracy as we are trending toward more and more authoritarianism, more and more autocracy, more and more government surveillance power being expanded. That's going on parallel to all of these other things simultaneously. So it's a very dangerous moment, and though I make jokes about Dick Veneer and facade news, I don't want to underemphasize the peril that we are in right now, and with someone who is, by most accounts, unhinged and very unstable, could easily engage the United States in some military action as a distraction. Do any of you see the Dustin Hoffman movie in the late 90s called Wag the Dog? Wag the Tail? What was it, tail or dog? Dog, okay, yeah. You'll recall that a president was in danger of being impeached. It's kind of like what was going on then. And then there would be some military action in order to distract the people's attention, because then then there's the flag waving, there are all these sanctimonious speeches about our brave men and women in uniform in harm's way. We have to stand up for them. We're all patriots. We're in this together. We are one nation when we're under attack. There's an acute danger of something like that happening, particularly on the Korean Peninsula, but also in other parts of the world, like the Middle East. So historical amnesia, as Chomsky has told us, is dangerous. Why is it dangerous? Not only because it undermines moral and intellectual integrity, but it lays the groundwork for further crimes. So let's just take the example from the, Let's Make America Great Again and America First president. Where did that term America First come from? There might be someone in the audience that knows the answer. It's directly from American fascism, from a neo-Nazi movement in the 1930s that was founded by Charles Lindbergh, who was a great hero because he flew solo across the Atlantic in 1927, who filled Madison Square Garden time after time, saying, stay out of Europe's wars, visited Nazi Germany, praised Goering and the Luftwaffe, thought this is the wave of the future, and this organization had over 800,000 members. And so for Trump, to use America First as a slogan is not only problematic, but historically illiterate. Someone should have been there to say, hey, come up with something else, but not that. Maybe preeminent America or prominent America. But America First has direct connections with fascism. So the signs are all out there in the open. From day to day. Just read the comment that FBI director, now fired FBI director Jim Comey made. He has recorded that Trump told him, I'm quoting here, I hope you can see your way clear of letting go of this Flynn investigation. He's a good guy, and I hope you can let this go. Now, I don't know if there are any law students in the audience here, but this is a classic definition of obstruction of justice. Here you have the President of the United States telling his FBI director to back off an investigation involving someone very close to him. So we're going to see how this plays out in the coming months, and I hope not years. But all of these things that are going on are not just evidence of morbid symptoms, but evidence of our country becoming a banana republic. You know how we used to laugh about El Salvador and Nicaragua and Guatemala? It all had to do with these Panama, Central American dysfunctional states, where there was, guess what, nepotism. Family members of the leader, were given plush jobs and had great influence over policy. Where, things didn't work. There was, payoffs, deals made under the table, all kinds of cronyism. And we used to laugh at those countries. Hey, they're just banana republics. That's all they're good for is growing bananas. Well, we have become a banana republic. Right under our noses, this has been transformed into a dysfunctional state. Congress barely functions with its gridlock and endless partisan bickering. It remains to be seen, but it's pretty scary to think that the fate of the republic may lie in the hands of people like Mitch McConnell, who I think will go down with the ship, with the Titanic, if he doesn't, wake up. But those are the people we're depending on. And if you're getting too confident about, calling Trump an ex-president, well, right behind him is Mike Pence, and right behind him is Paul Ryan. So pick your poison. It's arsenic or cyanide. You want to die right away? You take the cyanide. You want to live for a few months? You take the arsenic. Those are the choices. That is how bankrupt the system is. And if there were one candidate, who could have really made a difference, that would have been Bernie Sanders without a doubt. And who remains? Who is the most popular politician in the United States of America today, in May of 2017? It's this obscure senator, 75 years old, from a very small state, who gets the highest ratings, particularly among young people. Stunning that, that he made those kinds of connections. I saw it when he came to the University of Colorado at Boulder, to the campus. Thousands and thousands of students turned out, and I said, where did they come from? Wow, and look at the energy and the excitement. I mean, the sabotaging of his campaign by the Democratic National Committee is, I think, one of the great shame stories of this particular era. But there have been there's been a lot of pushback, but it's going to require sustained engagement. You just can't go to one demonstration in Eugene or in Salem or in Portland and then go home and email your friends, hey, I was at this demo, we had a great time, even scored a little weed and met some good friends, and we're working hard, to oust the regime in Washington or whatever, or in Salem and change the government. That's not going to do it. You may feel happy about doing something like that, and I'm glad you went. But what is required is organization. What is required is sustained engagement, not random, haphazard, when things happen, let's go do something. So while I endorse the Women's March on January 21st, a great demonstration, millions and millions of women and their allies around the world turned out to protest the Trump regime taking power the day before, or the tax day demonstrations, or the climate day demonstrations. These are all very important, but ultimately, if you go out to these things, you come back to Eugene, you come back to your community, and this is where you have to get active. This is where I hope there's Code Pink and 350.org and other organizations on and off campus where you can get involved and find kindred spirits, because one of the ways they manipulate us is to isolate us, to atomize us, to keep us in front of our little screens and handheld devices and not connect with people. It's so important to find allies, and you don't have to be leftist purist, If somebody does eat meat and you're a vegan, don't denounce that person for doing that. But do you agree that we should have clean air and clean water? Would you like to have parks to walk in? Would you like, healthy, nutritious food? Of course you would. So there are issues where we can find common ground and find allies and move a progressive agenda forward. But it takes a willingness to find that common ground, to find the places where we can, find general agreement. And so for too long, the left in this country has been conducting circular, firing squads, holier than thou, still arguing ridiculous questions like, was Lenin right? And what if Trotsky had lived? Who cares? Those guys are dead. They're long gone. We have to be in the moment. We have to be here right now. Our mother is under assault. Our mother is under attack. Gaia, Pachamama. And this is not some abstract, Steven Spielberg 2150 sci-fi movie. This is about what's happening in the lifetime of the young people in this audience. Within 20 to 30 years, if the calculations that are now being generated based on scientific evidence, if those calculations are even half correct, we are going to have major, major problems around the planet. So we have to think holistically about protecting our very home. I think, if we can learn anything from Native peoples, and I don't want to romanticize, Native American culture, but there are some, the reverence for the soil, the reverence for Mother Nature is something that we desperately need to inculcate in our worldview as well. For too long, nature has just been seen, we've been treating it like a dumpster and as also a resource base where we can make more and more profits. And under this predatory, rapacious capitalist system, there is no way it can reverse its gears and save the planet. We have to think about a different way of organizing economically the society. So that's a big step, Because if you think the people that created the problems are going to be the ones that solve it, probably not. And so it's in the capitalist DNA to make more and more money. That's what they're about. 7 generations, they couldn't give an F. Even 1 generation, even next year, they're about immediate profits right now. That's what the CEOs, that's what the whole structure of corporate capitalism is about, maximizing gain. What happens down the pike, you know, with Miami being flooded, with Bangladesh going underwater? Hey, that's somebody else's problem. I've made my money. I'm just sitting pretty right here. And what happens to the younger generation in particular will be affected. So this is the overriding issue. And now we have someone in the White House who calls climate change a hoax. A hoax, by the way, he said, invented by the Chinese. In order, why? To undermine, he said, American manufacturing. Well, wait a second. American manufacturing has been undermined by American capitalists who have moved the manufacturing base out of the country into tax havens, into low-wage areas like Vietnam and Bangladesh and Laos and Cambodia. So that man who's given the okay now to the Keystone XL pipeline and other pipelines may also agree to allow for offshore drilling along the Atlantic coast. That's what we're up against. I mean, this is truly serious. And, you know, I don't want to be an alarmist, but I do. And so, in a way, I want you to pay attention to what's going on and see some way for you to get involved in resistance. I don't know what that might be. Maybe it's starting an organic farm, or maybe it's doing some other activity, working on recycling. Anything you can do is worth doing. And even if we don't win, at least we have the dignity and self-respect of looking in the mirror and saying, I tried, I did my best. It's so important. You know, Martin Luther King Jr. Talked about this at great length. Let me see if I can find his quote. Here it is. Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but one must take it because one's conscience tells one that it is right. So we have to look back in our history as well to those great examples of people overcoming enormous odds and changing the culture. Think about the 6 women who met in upstate New York in Seward Park in 1846, who said, hey, we don't have any rights as women in this country. We can't even vote. You know, we have to sleep with our husbands on demand. We have to cook the food. We have to take care of the children. We have to sow the crops. We have to reap the crops. We do all the work. We have no rights. What's that about? That was the beginning of the women's movement. It took 60, 70 years before women were given the right to vote. People here can remember Rosa Parks, December 1st, 1955, the launching of the Montgomery bus boycott. You know, here was this incredibly courageous woman who had studied at the Highlander Center in Tennessee, who had mastered the techniques of Gandhian civil disobedience and nonviolence, and then brought them back home. You know, brought them back to Montgomery and launched that bus boycott. And this was the 3rd or 4th attempt in which she refused to sit down. The other 3 fizzled. The 4th one took off. So you never know what spark is going to set off a prairie fire. That's actually paraphrasing Chairman Mao, who said, a single spark can light a prairie fire. You don't know. That's why you make multiple efforts in different ways. And Howard Zinn talks about this too. Small acts accumulate and build, and it become a force that can change things. But if you're just thinking myopically, if you're just thinking, well, you know, this didn't work, I give up. No, try something else. Do something where you feel authentic. For example, there's a new community radio station here in Eugene, KEXP at 97, sorry, KEPW, where you can hear alternative radio, because KLCC, the Lane Community College station, took alternative radio off the air and refuses to broadcast Democracy Now! Get involved with that station. They need volunteers. Maybe that's something you could do. Maybe you have some technical talent, or you'd like to do interviewing. There's always something you can find. I mean, we're not in some rural backwoods, no disrespect meant here. You're in Eugene, Oregon. You've got privilege. Most of us have a roof over our heads. Most of us are eating fairly steadily and fairly well. We're not, in some desperate, impoverished situation. So it seems to me that there's even more of a burden on us in comfortable communities like Boulder, where I live. Boulder is very similar to Eugene, university town, big athletics department, and the like. But it all comes from struggle. It all comes from finding your métier, finding your place. And Frederick Douglass, who, incidentally, President Trump is not alive, he said, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom, yet deprecate agitation, are men and women who want crops without plowing the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the roar of its mighty waters. The struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. And that's the takeaway from this lecture. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. It's when you get off of Facebook and into the face of these powerful legislatures and the people who own the economy and rule the country that, get in their face, get off of Facebook. Make the creeps in the suites feel the heat in the streets. That's what they respond to. They respond... They respond to pressure. They don't want to get out of their very comfortable niche that they have carved for themselves. We need to rock the boat. We need to rock the Kasbah in ways perhaps not even imagined yet. So there's a lot of work to do. There's so many possibilities and so many openings that are there for you to get involved. Then this always becomes the odd part of of one of my lectures after denouncing capitalism. I revert to some shameless promotion of my products. Alternative radio is independent. It's in its 31st year. I started it on a whim and a lark. If I would have listened to the people who said, "You're crazy, don't even bother, no one's ever going to buy any of your programs." I remember my brother telling me, why would anyone buy a program after they hear it on the radio for free? I mean, it didn't make any sense to him. But anyway, I persevered, and I'm independent and progressive, and because of that, I don't have to look over my shoulder and worry about Lockheed Martin or Boeing or ExxonMobil. They might not like some of my programming. And so that independence, it's based on people like you supporting the program. Go to alternativeradio.org. I've got some catalogs here. You'll get, that mailing list is going around. And the big bargain, the big treat, I know there's any of you old enough here to remember CDs? I've been told now that CDs are way passé, and actually MP3s are even going out the door very soon as, again, capitalism constantly reinvents itself and makes other modes of technology obsolete. In order, you need to get the i7 or the i8. When the i8 comes out, you'll need to get the i9 because the apps that are now available will only be available on i9. So that's the whirlpool of the economic system. So there are 4 programs. mention was made that Vandana Shiva was here. She's a remarkable Indian woman, and she was just in Boulder, and I produced this program called Eco-Social Justice. There has to be environmental justice, particularly for communities of color that have been targeted with waste plants and radioactive material and the like. So economic, social justice, Vandana Shiva. Kshama Sawant, whoa, if you don't know who she is, find out. This young, dynamic city councilwoman in Seattle, the first socialist to be elected in Seattle since 1916. She was elected in 2013 and re-elected just last year. What it takes to win. So this ties into everything I've been talking about this afternoon. David Korten, who's a brilliant thinker, charts out what an ecological civilization would look like. What if we did honor our mother? What if we did nurture and cherish and love her and adore her as we should? What would that look like in terms of an economic structure? Because at the end of the day, we still need to have some economic parameters in which we can function. So David Korten, and I've got his latest book also, Change the Story, Change the Frame. And finally, Kali Akuno. Probably you've never heard of Kali. He's an African-American organizer. Where? Not in Boulder, not in Santa Fe, not in Santa Cruz, not in Eugene, in Jackson, Mississippi. One of the hardest places to work in the country. One of the, hard scrabble, endemic poverty and structural racism. And he is there organizing. So again, whenever I think, oh, I can't get involved, or things are too difficult, I'm inspired by people like Kali Akuno, who are working under such stressful conditions to make a better society for the besieged and beleaguered African American community in Jackson, Mississippi. So there are all these 4 one-hour alternative radio programs. If you got them from Boulder, it'd be $75. Here, it's just $20 to get them. And I even have those MP3 cards. So if you're into the MP3s, I have the cards with me. There are also some great books, including Chomsky's latest, and as well as some that are now collector's items because they're out of print. So let me just wind up. That's an applause line. I see you're not listening. Let me just wind up or come to a conclusion. You're supposed to say, whoa, finally. Talking about dynamic Indian women, like Vandana Shiva, like the great Arundhati Roy that I saw in Santa Fe just a week ago. She advises us, we can't talk about hope until we grasp reality. If we don't grasp reality, then everything we do is futile, because we're appealing to a system that can't be appealed to. It is disheartening, but once we understand the paradigm of power, then we can begin to act to challenge and change that power system. But that requires a clear understanding of where we are. It's late in the game, but there is still time. Fortunately, she says, power has a shelf life. When the time comes, maybe this mighty empire will, like others before it, overreach itself and implode from within. It looks as though structural cracks have already appeared as the war on terror casts its net wider and wider. The time has come, the walrus said. Perhaps things will get worse and then better. Perhaps there's a small goddess up in heaven readying herself for us. Another world is not only possible, she's on her way. Maybe many of us won't be here to greet her, but on a quiet day, if I listen very carefully, I can hear her breathing. Arundhati Roy, a great writer, anti-imperialist. And just 2 more short poems. Come back to the U.S. tradition. Marge Piercy, great feminist, a great leftist. You can read her poetry in the Monthly Review. She's written one collection called The Moon is Always Female. And I've quoted from that collection here on this campus before. So this is a new poem that she's written called "We Give Up Far Too Easily." Why do people get so discouraged about political action? You take vitamin pills and imagine they'll do something. You don't say, "I'll never wash the dishes again," because they'll just get dirty. We all mumble silly prayers into the air. "Oh, please don't let me miss the plane or miss the bus. Oh, please let him or her call me back." We never count times our wishes deflate as futile. Inaction certainly will work fine for the overlords who own our work. Inaction certainly will work fine for the overlords who own our own work, control our lives, consider us collateral damage in their grand schemes. They only fear masses in motion. A little at a time is the way forward, an unending dance, 2 steps forward, 1.5 back. Sitting on your ass too long makes you one. We're only what we've tried. Marge Piercy. And I think let's also hear it for art. Art is extremely important, be it theater, poetry, dance, music. The great Marxist anarchist revolutionary Emma Goldman said that art makes ideas felt. It gives concrete meaning to some of our wildest dreams and imaginations. So art plays a very crucial role in resistance. I'm going to stay and go back to South Asia again, an area where I've spent a good deal of time, to the greatest Urdu poet of the 20th century. He should be a household name here in Fez, but in Eugene, but perhaps he isn't. His name is Faiz Ahmed Faiz, F-A-I-Z. It's unusual. His first name and his last name is the same, Faiz Ahmed Faiz. He was born in Sialkot in what was then British India in 1911. He was a journalist and proud of it. He was a communist and proud of it. He was a trade union organizer and proud of it. And he was a political prisoner and proud of it under one of the many military regimes that the United States has supported in Pakistan. And his greatest and most famous poem is called Bol, B-O-L. Now you've learned the imperative in Urdu and in Hindi for speak. And so if you go to demonstrations in South Asia, in Nepal, and neighboring Bangladesh, you'll see placards, you'll see signs, Bol, and everyone knows what it means, the poem of resistance. Bol ke lab azad hai tere. Speak, your lips are free. Speak, your tongue is still yours. This magnificent body is still yours. Speak, your life is yours. Speak, there is little time, but little though it is enough time. Enough before the body perishes, before the tongue atrophies. Speak, the truth still lives. Say what you have to say. Speak, your lips are free. Bol, bol, bol. Thank you very much.
Let's get some questions.
Sure, questions, not speeches.
So we are going to take a few questions, and then, of course, David has his bazaar, and Michael has his signatures. So start with the questions, and then we'll finish that and turn over to the next steps. So who has a question?
Good afternoon, David.
Good
My
afternoon.
name's Dean Middleton. I'm a member of the Peace Committee here on campus. Curious what you think about the developments of Robert Mueller being appointed as a special prosecutor this morning, and wonder if you could speak a little bit about that.
Okay, should I rephrase the question for the recording? Yes. The question was about what I thought about the appointment of Robert Mueller by the Deputy Attorney General, not by the White House, not by Trump, to be the new special prosecutor investigating the case of alleged Russian interference in the 2016 election. But the scope of his investigation will go way beyond that. If you remember, for example, when Kenneth Starr was appointed special prosecutor by the Republican Congress in the mid-90s, that was supposed to be about a rigged real estate deal in Arkansas that the Clintons were involved in called Whitewater. But that led to the Monica Lewinsky scandal. So this could really open up a huge amount of information. The pundits on TV and radio seem to be unanimous that Mueller is an honorable man and will do the right thing. Let's hope so. I mean, this is a major thing that had been resisted tooth and nail by the Trump administration. They kept saying, well, there's no need for a special prosecutor. We've got 2 House committees investigating. We've got a Senate committee investigating. Isn't that enough? It's not enough. Because of the partisan gridlock in Congress, these committees are enormously hindered and hampered to proceed in a judicious and in a speedy way, because we can't, particularly what's happening with the climate change, we cannot wait much longer. I mean, already words like unprecedented and are being used over and over again. The polar ice caps are melting. Seawater is rising. I mean, this is happening right in front of us, and action is required, leadership is required. It may come from the streets, ultimately, not from the suites. Again, to go back to that metaphor, the heat in the streets will melt the creeps in the suites.
Another question?
How do we deal with the daily anxiety and stress of what's going on politically?
Oh, that's a great question. How do we deal with daily anxiety about what's going on? Well, I'll tell you how I deal with it. I go for hikes as often as I can. I bike everywhere in Boulder. It's a very bike-friendly town. I try and eat nutritious food. I read poetry. I look for really good movies to see. I seek out close friends and have, enlightening conversations. All of those things, and poetry, literature. There's so much out there in terms of depression and despair, which we all confront that mother, right? It happens to me too. But then I think of Eduardo Galeano, the great Uruguayan historian who wrote Open Veins of Latin America, and a great journalist as well. He died a couple of years ago. He said, let's save depression for better times. When we start winning, then we can afford to be depressed and wallow in despair. This is not the moment. Not when the earth itself is in danger. Not when this pale blue dot in the universe, as Carl Sagan called the planet, is in such peril. We have an obligation to future generations. I feel that very strongly, to leave the earth in a better place than when we found it. And things are unraveling, but I don't think the game is over. We've got to engage. And I'd like to actually quote from Chief Seattle. Now, this is an apocryphal quote. He may or may not have said it, but that doesn't matter. It's like all these quotes Mark Twain said. Probably he didn't say half of them, but people ascribe things to get attention. There's nothing ignoble about that. So Chief Seattle noticed among the European settlers that were coming to ravish the continent that there was a curious desire to accumulate more and more material wealth. And then he warned prophetically that if you keep soiling the bed you sleep in, you will ultimately choke on your own toxic fumes. And that's what we're doing. We're soiling the bed we sleep in, and we will ultimately choke on our own toxic fumes. So there's a lot to learn from indigenous culture, and we should embrace it.
Who are some other organizers, reporters, organizations, or campaigns that people should be paying attention to?
Well, I mentioned two of them. The question was about what other organizations or reporters that people should be paying attention to. I mentioned 350.org, founded by Bill McKibben. I sense that there must be a Eugene branch of 350. A fantastic group. Okay. Okay. And then there's, the work that Michael is talking about. Get involved with that. In terms of, I mentioned Code Pink. There are lots of organizations that are working on different issues. Thing is, find something that you feel comfortable with a group you feel some affinity with. It may not be perfect, but this isn't the time for perfection, because that undermines action. Like if, one strand is out of place. Oh, I can't talk to you. I'm sorry. This indicates some moral, deficiency in you, that you haven't combed your hair properly. The left has historically been doing this. I mean, we may be laughing, but we have undermined ourselves over and over again with this kind of insane, sectarianism. In terms of journalism, there's some great people out there. Matt Taibbi in Rolling Stone. I love The Intercept, which Glenn Greenwald founded, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. Jeremy Scahill writes for The Intercept, Murtaza Hussain, many other people, Lilian Segura, some other really fine journalists. Amy Goodman's work is exemplary. I'd like to include alternative radio in that category, if I may be so bold and brash. So there's a lot out there, but you have to be a good editor. And I say that as an editor, that when you open the internet, you've got to be a bit disciplined. Otherwise, you'll be swallowed alive. And then you come out 7-8 hours later and say, where have I been? And it's simply not possible to absorb all that information. So pick and choose, be careful. What sites, do you visit? Is it, Alex Jones, InfoWars? Is it Red State? Are these some hysterical chemtrails ideas and other kinds of distractions? The internet has become the new weapon of mass distraction. It's a WMD. So we have to see it, we have to see the media, and the internet is part of it, as a public health problem. And it should be monitored. We should be inoculated against the infectious diseases that the media produce, and take care of ourselves. But using common sense, the least common of all senses, always ask the question, who benefits? Who benefits from the Keystone XL pipeline? It's a very legitimate question. Is it you? Is it your family? Is it your friends, the Eugene community? Or is it JP Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs and Wells Fargo and the other big banks that backed it, that have paid for the pipeline? Is it ExxonMobil? Is it the big petrochemical giants? Of course they're going to benefit from it.
In terms of media, what do you think of Vice News?
What do I think of Vice News? Quite frankly, I haven't seen a single episode. Do you like it? Más o menos.
Yeah, it seems like it's presenting a more neutral, unbiased picture of things.
Yeah, I like John Oliver. I like Colbert. Stewart isn't on very much. Michael Moore has just announced a new film called November 11/9, right? No, Fahrenheit 11/9. And he's producing it right now. It's going to be out, I think, very, very quickly. Those are the kinds of artistic interventions that can have an impact on the culture. So I don't know, have other people seen Vice?
Yeah,
and
Vice, that channel, basically has a show called Rise, which is basically featuring indigenous voices and indigenous struggles. When you quote Frederick Douglass and Chief Seattle and all these other things, I think we need to come up with and create a sense of indigeneity that basically cultural recovery as well as addiction recovery. Because, for most of my life, the Russians were the enemies of my country. The Nazis were the enemies of my country. And now we have a Russian agent who has Nazis as part of national security, who displays signs of mental illness. So, the counter to that is like, well, as a black Indian, well, we've faced this before. There's nothing to get uptight about or afraid about. We've faced this before, and we came through it. So there's a level of sanity that has to be reached where we can basically detect the pollutants in the soil, measure the oxygen drop in the oceans, and basically feed, clothe, house people, and treat their mental illness independent of the system.
By the way, I'll be at Tsunami Books, which is your local independent bookstore, this evening at 7. It's going to be a celebration. There'll be music and poetry. I may say a few words as well, and it's a benefit for KEPW, the new Laura Kemp will be playing. I guess she's a local artist. Chico Schwal will be there. So come and support your independent bookstore. Tsunami.
What do you think it will take to have the deplorables shift in their thinking?
What do I think it will take to have the deplorables, I don't use that term, Hillary used it, a shift in their thinking? I don't think arrogant, holier-than-thou, ex-cathedra lecturing to people will ever work. Be they non-deplorables or deplorables or Marxist-Leninists or whatever. If I stand up here and diss you and act as if I'm the alpha omega of all knowledge and you have no standing whatsoever, I don't think that's going to make you feel very inclined toward hearing what I have to say because of this arrogance. And again, liberal Dems in particular are notorious for lecturing us about how things should be and you don't know, or this very dismissive term, particularly when it comes to the Middle East or any kind of foreign affairs issue. It's too complicated. You don't bother your busy little head with these things. Leave it to the pundits, the experts. They're in charge. That's why they went to Harvard and Princeton and Yale. They got the PhDs. They got the Nobel Prizes in economics. Leave everything to them. Well, we've left it to them, and this is where we are in 2017. So I think laying out information as best you can in a non-arrogant way, and see what they say. Now, I acknowledge that there are some people that cannot be reached. Again, talking about you as an editor. At that point, you have to make an editorial decision. Do you want to keep beating your head against the wall? Whether it's a family member, a nephew, or a niece, or a cousin, or a good friend. At some point, you say, enough. I tried. I gave the information. They chose to ignore it or dismiss it. And you move on. So I think what's going to happen, of course, as this debacle unfolds and unravels, that more and more of the 60 million people that fell for the Trump line will realize what a charlatan and con artist he is.
Have you heard Keith Olbermann talking for GQ in the short video series, The Resistance, since Trump's election?
The question was about Keith Olbermann and his series. I admire him very much. He's a very political sports analyst. But I haven't seen these things, but clearly you have. So would you tell the audience about it?
Sure. So it's a short video series that he's been running on YouTube since Trump's election, where he speaks very passionately and very informatively about Trump's policy decisions, about actions that he's taken, about interviews that he has given to the news, things like that.
So you recommend it?
I do very much,
And
yes.
it's short?
Yeah.
It's like 3 minutes, 5 minutes?
They run between 3 minutes and about 12 minutes, I think is the longest one that I've seen.
Any NPR fans out there in the audience? Oh, really?
I had one question. Tolstoy wrote 120 books in his lifetime, and for the longest time, he was the most prolific author on earth. Are you familiar with the author Daisaku Ikeda, who is president of the Soka Gakkai International that has 12 million members worldwide?
Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with that gentleman.
Because
but I've heard of Soka Gakkai.
But you've heard of the Soka Gakkai?
Yeah.
Because his books are now, I'm finding, the most useful and the most empowering. He's the most logical and down-to-earth author that you can find. And his books are difficult to get. They're hard to find on Amazon. You can find them at used bookstores. But Daisaku Ikeda is the most effective writer and speaker that I have ever found in my 50 years of perusing literature in this country.
It's Ikeda.
Yes.
Ikeda?
Yeah, in China they call him Dr. Ikeda, and millions of people know
But
him.
he's Japanese.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for that.
One last question.
My makeup's wearing off, so it's important.
Okay, last question.
Mike's not on.
So I think we should realize that we actually have been winning elections. The problem is that the Republicans are intent on suppressing the vote and gerrymandering their way to power. And to me, one of the most important issues is ranked choice voting, and I wonder what you think about that.
Choice? I didn't catch.
Ranked choice
Ranked
voting?
Is that like runoff? So that
Yeah, preference
those who come-
voting, so that,
those who come in
yes.
second and third, that would go a long way toward, in expanding democratic rights. Gerrymandering is a serious issue. It inhibits democracy. Democrats and Republicans have both historically engaged in gerrymandering whenever they control state houses. I think it should be made illegal. I think we should have universal voting and universal registration. Election day should never be on a working day. I mean, how insane is that? I mean, look at the French election, the Turkish election. It's always on it's a holiday or a weekend. We need to abolish the Electoral College, which is a relic of the feudalism. And we need a second dynamic political party in this country that, does not, a second party. So, thank you very much.